A city's river can be its main street and a mountain its central temple. Ancient urban planners did not fight their surroundings. They listened. They saw the natural landscape not as a problem to solve, but as the most important partner in design. This forgotten wisdom holds powerful answers for our own era of climate challenges and sprawling concrete. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the core principles that made ancient cities both breathtakingly beautiful and remarkably resilient. How did they build capitals that breathed with the wind and aligned with the stars? What secret logic lies behind legendary layouts that feel organically grown rather than built? The past is waiting to share its blueprints for a more harmonious future. What does a truly living city look like to you? This philosophy of harmony meant the land itself was the first architect. A site was not an empty canvas but a complex partner, one with its own voice, needs, and inherent wisdom. Planners began not with blueprints, but with deep observation, studying the sun's path, the direction of prevailing winds, and the secret language of water across the terrain. In China, this practice crystallized into Feng Shui, a system far beyond simple furniture placement. It was a rigorous discipline for reading the landscape's energy, or Kai. A master of Feng Shui would identify the protective embrace of surrounding hills, known as the black tortoise, green dragon, white tiger, and vermilion bird. They would chart the meandering path of water, the vital dragon veins of the earth, ensuring that settlements were positioned to gather prosperity and ward off misfortune. This was not magic, but a profound understanding of microclimates, water drainage, and defensibility, all encoded in a poetic language of celestial animals and flowing energy. Across the globe, the ancient Greeks pursued a similar ideal, which they called arete. For a city, achieving arete meant expressing its highest possible form, a form dictated uniquely by its location. A city on a rugged coast was meant to be different from one in a fertile valley. Its excellence lay in how perfectly it answered the questions posed by its geography. So before a single foundation trench was dug, these planners engaged in a long, silent dialogue with the place. They listened to the whispers of the wind and the stories told by the stones. This foundational respect, this belief that nature was a collaborator and not an obstacle, set the stage for the first tangible act of urban design, a step that would determine the city's very soul, its sacred center. This silent conversation with the terrain revealed the land's own suggestions for what should be built where. A natural ridgeline became a defensive wall, a gently sloping basin transformed into a perfect amphitheater for gatherings, and a persistent spring marked the future heart of a public square. The Roman architect Vitruvius codified this logic, advising planners to seek out locations with good breezes to clear the air, ample sunlight for warmth and health, and to always avoid the pestilent air of swampy grounds. This was not about conquering nature, but about aligning with its existing flows and strengths. The resulting city felt less constructed and more like it had emerged from the soil itself, its streets following the ancient trails of animals and rainwater, its strongest structures anchored to the bones of the earth. This deep reading created a foundation that was both energetically efficient and profoundly stable, a living system in harmony with its surroundings. And at the very core of this system, the element that dictated the life or death of any settlement was the careful management of water. Water was the city's sacred pulse, a force to be guided, not forced. Ancient planners understood that a settlement's survival depended on a respectful partnership with this essential element. They engineered solutions that celebrated water's presence, weaving it directly into the daily life and spiritual identity of the city. In the rose-red desert of Petra, the Nabateans faced a brutal paradox: torrential flash floods that could destroy as easily as they could nourish. Their genius was in listening to the desert's violent rhythm. They carved and constructed an intricate network of dams, channels, and underground cisterns that captured these sudden waters, taming the deluge into a reliable, life-giving resource. This system turned a barren landscape into a lush, impregnable capital, a testament to working with a climate's extremes, not against them. Half a world away, the Khmer Empire expressed a similar reverence on a monumental scale. The West Barre at Angkor is staggering, an artificial reservoir so vast it resembles an inland sea. But it was far more than a practical reservoir. It was the beating heart of the city, a central symbol of cosmic order. Its precise alignment mirrored heavenly bodies, making it a crucial part of the kingdom's spiritual architecture, while also supporting a massive irrigation network that fed thousands. This was water management as a sacred duty, blending utility with deep cosmological belief. Even earlier, in the impeccably planned streets of Mohenjo-Daro, we find a profound concern for public health and hydrological respect. The city featured the world's first known covered drainage system, with sophisticated channels that efficiently managed wastewater while protecting the purity of the groundwater below. Every well, every bath complex was placed with an understanding of the subterranean flows. This careful, integrated management of water did more than just prevent thirst or illness. It created the literal fertile ground upon which urban civilization could flourish, allowing for abundant agriculture right at the city's doorstep. This seamless integration of water management naturally gave rise to another revolutionary idea: the city that fed itself. Ancient urban landscapes often refused to draw a hard line between where people lived and where their food was grown. Instead of distant, anonymous farms, agriculture was woven directly into the urban fabric, creating a living, breathing, and self-sustaining ecosystem. The legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon stand as an enduring symbol of this ambition, a vision of a lush, elevated paradise built into the very heart of a mighty city, a place where royal power was expressed not just in stone but in flourishing life. While their exact existence is debated by scholars, the myth itself is powerful, representing a deep, ancient longing for a verdant urban world. This was not just a fantasy. In the capital of the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan, this ideal was a stunning reality. Built on an island in Lake Texcoco, the city was surrounded by vast grids of Chinampas. These were not truly floating, but artificial islands constructed from woven reeds and rich lake mud. They were astonishingly productive, sometimes yielding up to 7 harvests a year, feeding an immense urban population while simultaneously creating habitat for fish and waterfowl, enhancing the local ecology rather than depleting it. The city and its gardens were a single, integrated organism. Along the Nile, the rhythm of urban life was dictated by the river's annual flood. Egyptian cities were not separated from their agricultural land by vast distances, they were partners with it. Urban plots and temple estates were meticulously designed to capture and utilize the receding floodwaters through intricate canal systems. This meant food was grown just beyond the city's edge, or even within its ceremonial centers, drastically reducing the energy and cost required for transport. What can this ancient wisdom teach us about our own food systems? This approach created incredible resilience. A city with integrated agriculture was more secure, less vulnerable to supply chain disruptions or distant crop failures. It maintained a constant, vital green presence, cooling the air, supporting wildlife, and reminding its inhabitants daily of their connection to the land that sustained them. The built environment was not a sterile imposition, but a truly living system. The very shape of a city was a conversation with the land. Ancient planners did not see a steep hill as an inconvenience to be bulldozed, but as a dramatic feature to be celebrated. They practiced a form of architectural listening, allowing the mountains and valleys to dictate the flow of streets and the placement of buildings. This was not a compromise, it was a core principle of intelligent design. The result was a city that felt like a natural outgrowth of the terrain, as if it had emerged from the earth over centuries rather than being imposed upon it in a single generation. This approach conserved immense amounts of energy and resources, minimizing the need to move vast quantities of earth. More importantly, it created an unbreakable bond between the built environment and its location, giving every city a powerful, unique sense of place. There is perhaps no greater example of this than the Inca citadel of Machu Picchu. Perched between soaring peaks, its stone structures seem to melt into the mountain ridge. Terraces follow the natural contours of the land, stabilizing the slopes for agriculture while mimicking their form. Temples and dwellings are carved from and around the living rock, creating a seamless fusion of human artistry and geological wonder. The city does not dominate the mountain, it completes it. This was a physical manifestation of a deep spiritual belief, a view of the earth as a living, sacred being to be honored, not conquered. Across the world in ancient Greece, the city of Priene demonstrates the same principle applied to a different landscape. Built on a steep hillside overlooking a river valley, its planners did not fight the slope. Instead, they designed a terraced grid where each ascending street followed the natural grade. This clever layout solved multiple problems at once. It provided natural drainage for rainwater, created stunning panoramic views from nearly every level, and organized the city into distinct, manageable neighborhoods. The main public buildings were often placed on the higher terraces, their prominence earned through the natural ascent. Walking through Priene would have been a dynamic experience, a constant dialogue with the land itself. What does it feel like to live in a city that echoes the shape of the earth? This respectful adaptation meant that the terrain itself wrote the rules for movement and community. A city on a hill had a different social rhythm than one on a plain. The flow of people, the gathering points, the very sightlines were all shaped by the ground beneath their feet. This created an urban identity that was intrinsically linked to its location, a character that could not be replicated anywhere else. The land was not just a setting, it was a co-author of the city's story. This deep connection to the land was not merely practical, it was profoundly spiritual. For ancient civilizations, the landscape was a divine text, and certain natural features were seen as sacred dwellings of gods or ancestral spirits. A distinctive mountain peak, an ancient grove of trees, or a life-giving spring were not just landmarks but portals to the divine. Urban plans were therefore designed as acts of reverence, deliberately incorporating and venerating these features to infuse the entire city with spiritual meaning. In Japan, the layout of the ancient capital Nara was carefully oriented towards the surrounding sacred mountains, which were viewed as powerful protectors watching over the city. The mountains were not a distant backdrop, they were active participants in the city's spiritual life. Similarly, the oracle at Delphi in Greece was not built in a random location of convenience. It grew around a sacred spring and a fissure in the earth from which intoxicating vapors emerged, believed to be the very breath of the god Apollo. The entire complex, one of the most important spiritual centers of the ancient world, was organized around this natural phenomenon. By making these landmarks the focal points of their cities, planners created a constant physical reminder of humanity's place within a larger cosmic order. Streets aligned toward a sacred peak, temples were built upon a holy spring, and public squares opened toward a venerated grove. This sacred geography provided a moral and spiritual compass for the inhabitants, grounding their daily lives in a worldview that respected the living earth. This reverence for the natural world extended even further, shaping the very quality of the air they breathed and the sunlight that warmed their streets, principles that guided the placement of every home and public building. The comfort of an ancient city was not an accident, but a carefully choreographed dance with the sun and the wind. This sixth principle transformed entire settlements into sophisticated instruments of passive climate control, creating environments that were naturally cool in the desert heat and warm in the mountain chill, all without a single watt of electricity. Architects and planners possessed a deep, intuitive knowledge of their local sky, charting the sun's journey across the seasons and mapping the persistent direction of the prevailing winds. They then designed their streets and buildings to be conduits for these natural forces, not barriers against them. In the baking heat of the Middle East, the original circular design of Baghdad was a masterpiece of this thinking. Its narrow, winding alleyways were not a result of chaotic growth, but were intentionally designed to create deep, cooling shadows for most of the day. These same passages acted as wind tunnels, channeling even the faintest breezes to provide relief. Courtyards at the heart of homes became private oases, their high walls and central gardens creating a microclimate of still, cool air, a refuge from the intensity of the open desert. This was urban design as a form of environmental hospitality. Across the Mediterranean, the Romans applied a similar logic with military precision. Their classic town plan, built around the Cardo and Decumanus, was more than just an exercise in order. This cross-shaped street grid was a brilliant solar strategy. By aligning the main avenues with the cardinal directions, they ensured that the majority of buildings, especially the vital shops and homes along these thoroughfares, received optimal sunlight throughout the year. This maximized natural light and warmth, banishing damp and chill from the urban core. In cooler northern climates, this wisdom was expressed differently. Entire villages and towns were strategically placed on south-facing slopes. Here, the land itself became a tool, angled like a solar panel to capture the low, precious rays of the winter sun, while offering some protection from cold northern winds. This simple, intelligent placement meant the difference between a home that was perpetually cold and one that was naturally warmed. Can you feel the difference between a room flooded with morning light and one left in perpetual shadow? These ancient planners could, and they built entire cities around that feeling. This bioclimatic design was not a luxury. It was the foundation of sustainable and pleasant urban life for centuries. It demonstrates a truly holistic view of the world, where the city was a bridge between the earth and the sky, its very streets aligned with the grand, celestial clockwork above. This cosmic connection went even deeper, reaching into the very heart of a city's spiritual and social identity. The city itself became a vast observatory, with streets and temples pointing toward the stars. This seventh principle of celestial alignment transformed urban centers into instruments for reading the cosmos, connecting the rhythm of daily life directly to the grand cycles of the heavens. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, the immense Avenue of the Dead does more than connect pyramids. It frames the setting sun on a day of profound ceremonial significance, while the entire city grid whispers of an alignment with the Pleiades star cluster. This was not simply stargazing, it was city planning on a cosmic scale. The alignment served a vital, practical purpose, functioning as a colossal calendar that dictated the timing for planting, harvests, and sacred festivals, synchronizing the entire community with the universe. This deep integration of astronomy and urban design is a global phenomenon. The Great Pyramid of Giza demonstrates an almost impossible precision. its square base aligned to the four cardinal directions with an error of just a fraction of a degree. To achieve this, ancient Egyptian surveyors must have possessed a sophisticated understanding of the Earth's rotation and the fixed points in the night sky. What drove these cultures to invest such immense effort into this celestial choreography? The answer lies in a worldview where the human, natural, and cosmic realms were a single, interconnected whole. A king's authority, a city's prosperity, and the community's spiritual well-being were seen as dependent on this harmony with the celestial order. By building a city that mirrored the heavens, planners created a sacred map on the ground, a place where people could live in constant, conscious alignment with the universe. This cosmic ordering was just one layer of a complex system that also included a sophisticated understanding of the land's own unseen energies, a subtle force that shaped everything from a building's orientation to the flow of life within its walls. The city blueprint was not just a physical map, but a chart of invisible currents. Beyond the sun and the wind, ancient planners perceived a subtler layer of influence, the very energy of the earth itself. This eighth principle, a practice known as geomancy, guided the placement of everything from a city's main gate to the hearth of a family home. In China, Feng Shui masters spoke of dragon lines, the hidden pathways of Kai, or life force that coursed through the landscape. Their goal was to identify and build upon the most auspicious flows of this energy, while carefully avoiding the negative or stagnant currents they called Shui. A master planner would never cite a main entrance where a straight, rushing path of wind, a classic Kai, could strike it directly. This was not mere superstition, but a sophisticated system for reading the land's character. The practical outcome was often a city plan that naturally avoided wind tunnels, unstable slopes, and other geologically or climatically challenging spots. A similar wisdom guided the creation of Vastu Shastra in ancient India. This Vedic science of architecture provided precise formulas for orienting a building to harmonize with the five elements and the perceived energy grid of the planet. A home designed by Vastu principles would have its most important rooms facing the nourishing east for morning sun, while its storage areas might be placed in the cooler west. The central space was kept open and clear, a concept mirroring the vital courtyard found in so many traditional designs worldwide. This was about more than comfort. It was about aligning human life with a cosmic and terrestrial balance. Can a building's orientation truly affect your well-being? These ancient traditions answered with a resounding yes, treating the land as a living, breathing partner in the creation of a healthy community. The success of this profound collaboration is written in stone across the world, in cities that have endured for millennia as powerful testaments to a completely integrated vision of urban life. The blueprint for urban life began here in the Fertile Crescent, where the land itself dictated the city's form. The world's first great cities, and Uruk, did not erupt from a rigid geometric plan imposed by a distant ruler. Instead, they grew organically from the mud and reeds of the riverbanks, their layouts a direct and intelligent response to the flat, sun-drenched landscape between the Tigris and Euphrates. At the heart of this urban organism stood the ziggurat, a colossal stepped pyramid that functioned as an artificial, sacred mountain. This was more than a temple. It was the city's spiritual and administrative core, a constant visual anchor visible from every winding alley. And those alleys are the key to understanding Mesopotamian genius. Their irregular, seemingly chaotic paths were not a failure of design, but its ultimate expression. These narrow, winding streets were a perfect adaptation. They carved deep channels of cooling shade, offering respite from the relentless Mesopotamian sun, while their tight, labyrinthine nature made the city a formidable puzzle for any potential invader. fostering a dense, interdependent community. Every home, every workshop was intimately connected to the true skeleton of the city, the vast and complex network of irrigation canals. These man-made rivers were the lifeblood, branching from the great Tigris and Euphrates to feed not only the fields but the very identity of the urban center. Can you see the pattern? The city was not placed upon the land. It was an extension of the water system itself. This was integration at its most fundamental, a dynamic, evolving relationship between human ambition and the relentless, nourishing logic of the river. The Nile River was the central actor in the sacred drama of Thebes, its annual flood a predictable, life-giving heartbeat. Ancient planners did not merely build beside this river, they built an entire cosmology around it, using the sun's daily journey to structure the very meaning of life and what comes after. The city was a deliberate, sprawling expression of this belief, a conscious division of the landscape into realms of existence. On the eastern bank, the side where the sun god Ra was reborn each morning, stood the temples of Karnak and Luxor, the domain of the living. These colossal structures were not isolated monuments but connected parts of a vast ceremonial machine, linked by a processional avenue lined with sphinxes. This path was more than a road, it was a divine corridor, its alignment choreographed with the solar cycle and the rhythm of the Nile's inundation. To walk this avenue during a festival was to participate in the universe's own order. Across the river, on the western bank where the sun died each evening, lay the silent, stark landscape of the necropolis. This was the city of the dead, a realm of tombs and mortuary temples, including the legendary Valley of the Kings. Here, the journey of the soul continued, with the resting places of pharaohs carved deep into the arid hills, mirroring the sun's descent into the underworld. The Nile was the central artery connecting these two worlds, a flowing boundary and a conduit for both physical goods and spiritual passage. Funeral barges carried individuals on their final voyage from the vibrant east to the eternal west, a daily reenactment of a cosmic truth. This was urban planning as a grand, three-dimensional map of the soul's journey. Every citizen of Thebes, from the highest priest to the humblest laborer, lived within this sacred geography, their daily movements and ultimate destiny framed by the unchangeable logic of the river and the sun. The city's design was a constant, physical reminder of their place within a vast, meaningful cycle, making the landscape itself a teacher of profound spiritual lessons. Machu Picchu clings to the mountain ridge like a natural outgrowth of the stone itself. This is not a city placed upon the land, but one woven directly into the Andes' granite bones. The Inca planners approached the site not as a blank slate to be conquered, but as a sacred partner in a grand design. Every contour of the mountain spine was listened to, its form dictating the function of the city. The agricultural terraces that cascade down the slopes are a perfect example of this responsive design. They are not rigid, geometric impositions, but flowing lines that follow the mountain's own curves. This graceful adaptation did more than create flat spaces for growing food. It actively stabilized the entire hillside, anchoring the soil against the relentless tropical rains and preventing catastrophic erosion. The mountain and the city worked together in a single, sustainable system. Even the buildings themselves demonstrate this profound collaboration. Instead of leveling the ground, builders incorporated massive, existing rock outcrops right into the walls of temples and dwellings. A living stone would form one corner of a royal residence, its unyielding surface seamlessly becoming part of the structure. This was more than a practical choice to save labor. It was a spiritual act, a way of honoring the enduring spirit they perceived within the mountain. These rocks were often considered huacas, natural shrines imbued with divine presence. By integrating them so completely, the city's very architecture became a continuous act of reverence. At the highest point of the complex sits the Intihuatana stone, a masterpiece of this fusion. It is not a freestanding monument brought to the peak, but a breathtaking sculpture carved directly from the mountain's own granite summit. This ritual stone, often called a hitching post of the sun, was used for celestial observations, linking the Earth directly to the cycles of the sun and stars. Its power and meaning are inextricable from its origin, the living rock of the sacred peak. This deep integration extended even to the management of water, a constant and powerful force in the cloud forest. The Incas engineered a sophisticated network of stone canals and drainage channels that run beneath the plazas and terraces. These unseen veins carefully guide rainwater along predetermined paths, dispersing the flow and preventing the saturation that could trigger landslide. The entire city functions as a single, cohesive organism with the mountain, a testament to a world where the divine was not somewhere beyond the clouds, but present in every stone, every spring, and every contour of the living earth. While the Incas sculpted their city from a mountain, another civilization was mastering a different element entirely on the fertile plains of the Indus Valley. The city of Mohenjo-Daro was a metropolis of water, a place where the flow and purity of this life-giving resource dictated the design of every street and every home. This was not just reverence, it was a highly sophisticated form of urban engineering, a system built with public health as its foundational principle. Imagine a city from over 4,000 years ago where many houses had their own private baths and wastewater was carried away through a network of covered, brick-lined drains running beneath the main streets. This was the reality for the people of Mohenjo-Daro. They did not simply adapt to their environment, they engineered a new one from the ground up, creating a remarkably clean and organized urban center. The entire city was built on a raised platform of mud brick, a massive undertaking that lifted the community above the floodplain of the mighty Indus River. This was a proactive defense against the river's seasonal moods, ensuring the city's survival year after year. At the heart of the raised Citadel district stood the Great Bath, a large, meticulously waterproofed public tank that likely served both ritual purification and social gathering. This structure tells us that water was not just a practical concern here, it was central to the city's cultural and spiritual identity. How did they achieve such a feat of urban planning? The answer lies in a remarkable standardization. The city was laid out in a grid-like pattern of streets, and the bricks used throughout Mohenjo-Daro were manufactured to a consistent, uniform size. This was not an aesthetic choice, it was a functional one. Standardized bricks meant standardized channels, drains, and wells, making the entire hydraulic system predictable, maintainable, and incredibly efficient. Every component worked in concert, from the individual household wells drawing up clean groundwater to the covered drains ensuring waste was swiftly removed, protecting that very water source from contamination. This was a closed-loop system of brilliant pragmatism. Mohenjo-Daro stands as powerful proof that the ancient integration of nature was not only a philosophical ideal, it could also be a triumph of technical skill and systematic thought. They paired a deep understanding of hydrology with a profound concern for communal well-being, creating a blueprint for a healthy city that would not be rivaled for millennia. This deep connection to place was literally set in stone. Ancient builders understood that the most sustainable and harmonious materials were already beneath their feet, waiting to be used. They did not import marble from across continents or manufacture synthetic composites. They looked to the local earth itself. This was the ultimate expression of integration, ensuring that a building did not just sit on the land but was physically made from it. The pueblos of the American Southwest are a breathtaking example. Constructed from adobe, a simple mixture of earth, water, and straw, these multi-story structures seem to erupt organically from the desert floor. Their rounded, soft-edged forms and earthy hues mirror the mesas and canyons around them, creating a visual harmony so complete it feels like the landscape itself decided to provide shelter. The material was not just aesthetically fitting, it was a brilliant climatic adaptation. Adobe's high thermal mass means it absorbs heat during the scorching days and slowly releases it during the cold nights, naturally regulating indoor temperatures in a demanding environment. This same principle of local sourcing guided the builders of classical Greece. The gleaming white marble of the Parthenon was not brought from some distant, exotic quarry. It was hewn from the very hills of Mount Pentelicus, just northeast of Athens. The stone's specific texture and subtle color variations directly echoed the local geology, making the temple feel like a natural, permanent feature of the Acropolis rock. It was an assertion that the city's greatest spiritual monuments belonged to that specific place and no other. Perhaps the most dramatic fusion of material and place is found in Cappadocia, Turkey. Here, entire cities were not built upon the landscape, but carved directly into it. Early inhabitants found soft, malleable volcanic rock and transformed it into a subterranean world of dwellings, churches, and monasteries. This was architecture by subtraction, a process of revealing space rather than constructing it. The result was a city that was virtually invisible from a distance, perfectly insulated from summer heat and winter cold, and utterly inseparable from its geological foundation. This vernacular approach, using what is locally available and culturally established, did more than just save energy. It created an architecture of authenticity, where every building told the story of its region. The materials were inherently suited to withstand local weather patterns, from heavy rain to intense sun, and they aged gracefully, their weathering process blending them even more deeply into the natural tapestry. In an age of globalized, energy-intensive construction, this ancient rule feels more relevant than ever. What would our cities look like if they were built from the color and character of their own earth? A city's landscape did more than shape its streets, it molded the very soul of its society. When your main thoroughfare is a flowing river and your most sacred site is a living mountain, your entire culture grows from that relationship. This daily, tangible interaction with the natural world forged a powerful collective identity. Everyone understood they were part of a system much larger than themselves, a community bound by a shared dependence on the same water source, the same protective hills, the same sun. This connection was actively celebrated and reinforced through the rhythm of the year. Seasonal festivals were not arbitrary holidays, but vital ceremonies tied to the land's own cycles. A community would gather to celebrate the life-giving arrival of the river's flood or to mark the sun's triumphant return at the winter solstice. These were not just parties, they were profound collective acts that synchronized the human community with the pulse of the earth, strengthening social bonds with every shared ritual. The places where people came together were almost always defined by natural features. The Greek agora, the Roman forum, the Indian stepped well. These hubs of conversation, commerce, and community were invariably built around a spring, a grove, or a strategic vantage point. The stepped wells of the Indian subcontinent, for instance, are architectural marvels. They were not merely sources of water but cool, subterranean palaces for social life, where the descent to the water's edge was a daily journey shared by all, fostering chance encounters and strengthening the fabric of the community. This constant, intimate reliance bred a powerful, inherent form of stewardship. When you draw your drinking water from the river, bathe in it, and use it to transport your goods, the idea of polluting it becomes unthinkable. The landscape was not a resource to be exploited, but a partner to be respected. It became a living library, its every rock and grove holding a story, a myth, a piece of history. Parents would point to a distinctive cliff and tell the tale of an ancestral hero, or to an ancient tree that witnessed a founding event. This oral tradition, woven into the physical environment, educated each new generation about their place in the world and their profound responsibility to care for it. The land itself was the teacher, and its lessons were about belonging, continuity, and respect. This profound partnership with nature stands in stark contrast to the philosophy that shaped our modern world. The Industrial Revolution marked a dramatic turning point, a fundamental shift from integration to a new ethos of separation and control. Rivers were no longer seen as sacred partners but as problems to be solved, channelized in concrete, and treated as little more than industrial plumbing. Hills that once defined a city's character were flattened for the convenience of the grid. Nature was no longer a collaborator woven into daily life, but something to be pushed to the edges, confined to designated parks like a museum exhibit. This was a move from the living ecosystem to the efficient machine. The modernist architectural movement, for all its noble intentions, often accelerated this disconnect with its vision of the tower in the park. This ideal, which promised light and air, frequently resulted in isolated, windswept plazas, where monolithic buildings stood aloof from their surroundings, creating spaces that felt impersonal and empty. This approach enabled rapid, standardized expansion, but it came with a heavy, hidden cost. We see the consequences all around us today. Vast expanses of asphalt and concrete absorb the sun's heat, creating urban heat islands that can be several degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside. Impermeable surfaces prevent rainwater from soaking back into the earth, leading to overwhelmed drainage systems and destructive flash flooding where once the land would have absorbed the deluge. The rich tapestry of local biodiversity is replaced by a monoculture of ornamental plants, severing the connection between urban dwellers and the natural world. Perhaps the most profound loss is a psychological one, a subtle but persistent feeling of disconnection from the environment that sustains us. The ancient model understood the city as a complex, living ecosystem. The modern model, for much of the last century, has treated it as a machine for living, prioritizing efficiency over harmony. Recognizing this fundamental contrast is not about placing blame, but about understanding the roots of our current challenges. It is the essential first step in a much-needed course correction, a journey to rediscover the timeless wisdom that can guide us toward building cities that are not just efficient, but truly alive and resilient. This full-circle return to ancient wisdom is not just a trend, but a profound course correction. We are now witnessing the rise of the biophilic design movement, a conscious effort to weave the living world back into the concrete and steel of our cities. It is a formal recognition of something ancient planners knew in their bones, that our well-being is inextricably linked to our connection with nature. This modern philosophy translates that instinct into actionable design principles, creating spaces that nourish the human spirit as much as they shelter the body. We see this in the resurrection of buried waterways, a practice that directly honors the sacred role of water systems from places like Mohenjo-Daro. In cities like Seoul and Zurich, engineers have dramatically daylighted long-buried streams and rivers, tearing away the concrete pipes that confine them and restoring them to the light. These are no longer just flood control projects. They are public gathering spaces, linear parks that bring the sight and sound of flowing water back into the heart of the urban experience, cooling the air and restoring a lost piece of the local ecosystem. It is a modern act of listening to the land, of letting the water find its voice again. Similarly, the explosion of green roofs and living walls is a direct echo of the hanging gardens of Babylon, a desire to let life flourish vertically. These are not merely decorative features. A building capped with a green roof absorbs storm water, reduces the urban heat island effect, and provides a habitat for pollinators, functioning as a tiny, elevated piece of the natural world. A living wall breathes, its plants filtering particulate matter from the air and creating a dynamic, changing facade that connects people inside to the rhythms of growth and season. This is the modern equivalent of building with the mountain, of allowing biology to become part of the architecture. The careful choreography of natural light and ventilation, so masterfully executed by the Romans and Greeks, is also making a powerful comeback. Contemporary buildings are now designed with deep light wells, strategically placed courtyards, and operable windows that encourage cross breezes, drastically reducing the need for artificial lighting and air conditioning. This is not just about energy efficiency, it is about human health. Studies consistently show that access to natural light improves mood, regulates sleep cycles, and boosts productivity. Our bodies, it seems, never forgot the ancient rule of living in sync with the sun and the wind. Biophilic design understands that this connection is not a luxury, but a fundamental human need. It represents a conscious effort to relearn a language we once spoke fluently, the language of integrated design that creates cities which are not just places to live, but places that help us feel truly alive. The spiritual vision of a city in harmony required a backbone of pure engineering genius. To make the land a partner, these planners first had to become masters of physics, hydraulics, and structural design. The breathtaking terraces of Machu Picchu are a perfect example. They appear as graceful, natural steps on the mountainside, but their beauty hides a profound technical achievement. Each terrace is a complex, layered system. The foundation consists of crushed rock for drainage, topped by a layer of smaller stones, then gravel, sand, and finally rich topsoil. This prevented water from pooling and saturating the ground, which would have turned the entire mountainside into a catastrophic landslide with the first heavy rain. Sophisticated retaining walls, built with interlocking stones that shifted and settled without collapsing, held everything in place. This was not simple farming. It was geotechnical engineering on a monumental scale, allowing a mountain to be both a cathedral and a breadbasket. In the arid lands of ancient Persia, survival depended on a different kind of subterranean magic, the Qanat. This was a system of gently sloping underground tunnels that tapped into water trapped deep within mountain aquifers. Skilled engineers would dig a vertical shaft down to the water table, then begin carving a tunnel that sloped ever so slightly downhill, sometimes for dozens of miles, all by gravity alone. A chain of access shafts, visible from the surface as a line of circular holes, allowed for construction and maintenance. The Qanat was a revolutionary invention. It prevented water from evaporating under the desert sun, delivered it reliably to the city and its fields, and did so without a single pump. It was a technology of profound humility, working silently and invisibly within the earth to sustain civilizations for thousands of years. Even the mighty Roman aqueducts, so famous for their towering arcades, share this core principle of intelligent gravity flow. While their bridges are awe-inspiring, their true genius lay in the relentless, precise gradient of the water channel, or specus, which often ran for miles at a near-perfect decline. Roman surveyors used tools like the chorobates, a precise leveling instrument, to ensure water would flow smoothly and consistently from a distant spring to the heart of the city. The arcades were merely brilliant solutions for crossing deep valleys, keeping the vital downward slope intact. These were not crude attempts or happy accidents. They represent centuries of accumulated observation, innovation, and meticulous problem-solving. This seamless blending of art and science proves that building with nature was never a primitive or simplistic retreat. It was, and remains, one of the most demanding and sophisticated approaches to design ever conceived, a path that required deep listening to the earth followed by brilliant, practical answers. A city's streets could be a map of the heavens. This symbolic layer transformed practical urban design into a living storybook, where every structure and pathway held a deeper, mythic meaning. The city itself became a microcosm, a small-scale model of the entire cosmos as the culture understood it. In Mesopotamia, the towering ziggurat was far more than a temple platform. It was a symbolic sacred mountain, a man-made peak deliberately constructed in the flat river plains to serve as a ladder between the world of humans and the realm of the gods. Climbing its levels was a spiritual ascent, a physical journey toward the divine. A similar fusion of mountain and monument appears in the Mayan world. Their massive pyramids were not just tombs or temples, they were often explicit representations of the Wits, the sacred mountain of creation. The Grand Ball Court, another central urban feature, was not merely a sporting arena. In the Mayan creation myth, the hero twins defeated the lords of the underworld in a ball game, and thus the court itself became a symbolic portal to Xibalba, the realm of the ancestors. To witness a game was to watch a reenactment of this cosmic struggle between life and death, order and chaos. This symbolic intent reached its most refined expression in the planning of Chinese capital cities. The entire urban layout was designed to mirror the perfect, unchanging order of the heavens. The emperor's palace, positioned at the exact northern center of the city, represented the pole star, the fixed pivot around which the celestial sphere silently turns. The city walls, gates, and major avenues were meticulously aligned with the cardinal directions, creating a terrestrial reflection of the cosmic grid. This was urban planning as a sacred act, ensuring that the human realm was in constant, harmonious alignment with the forces of the universe. What does it feel like to live inside a story? For the inhabitants of these cities, a simple walk through the streets was a journey through their culture's most cherished myths. The path to the market might parallel the river of the underworld. The ascent to the temple recreated a primordial climb, and the central plaza echoed the moment of creation. This narrative depth embedded the community's values and identity into the very ground they walked on. The cityscape became the most powerful teacher, a three-dimensional text that every citizen, regardless of literacy, could read and understand. It reinforced social bonds, guided behavior, and provided a profound sense of place within a grand, cosmic order. This symbolic foundation ensured that the wisdom of the past was not just remembered, but physically experienced with every step, generation after generation. These ancient strategies are not relics, but a living blueprint for the challenges we face now. The core lesson is one of resilience, a quality written into the very stones of places like Machu Picchu and Mohenjo-Daro. Their cities endured for centuries not in spite of their environments, but because of them. We can adopt this same foresight today by rethinking our relationship with water. For decades, the modern impulse was to bury unruly urban streams in concrete pipes, treating them as a nuisance. The ancient approach, seen from the West Barre to the Chinampas, was to celebrate and integrate water. We are rediscovering this wisdom through a practice called daylighting, where these buried waterways are freed from their tombs. This single act transforms a hidden liability into a public asset, creating natural channels that absorb floodwaters, while the new riverbanks become lush, cooling corridors for people and wildlife. It is a direct application of a 4,000-year-old principle, solving a modern problem with timeless logic. beyond our rivers, we can regreen the very skin of our cities. Ancient planners used local materials and forms that breathed with the land. We can emulate this by prioritizing green infrastructure. Imagine a city where parking lots are made of permeable pavers that allow rainwater to seep back into the earth, replenishing aquifers instead of overwhelming sewers. Picture urban forests and rooftop gardens not as decorative afterthoughts, but as essential public utilities that clean the air, provide shade, and dramatically lower ambient temperatures. This is the modern equivalent of the narrow, shaded alleys of Baghdad or the south-facing slopes of Roman towns, a way of letting the landscape itself do the work of climate control. Our buildings, too, can relearn the old rhythms of the sun and wind. The passive solar principles that warmed ancient villages can be refined with contemporary materials to create structures that need a fraction of the energy to heat and cool. Strategic window placement, thermal mass, and the clever channeling of breezes are no longer just traditional techniques. They are the hallmarks of cutting-edge, sustainable architecture. This shift demands more than new technology. It requires a fundamental change in perspective. It asks us to abandon the one-size-fits-all model of globalized design and instead become students of our own local places. What are the prevailing winds in your city? Where does the water want to go when it rains? The answers to these questions are the first steps toward building cities that are not just sustainable, but truly regenerative, creating a future where our urban landscapes are once again part of the living world. These brilliant city plans, however, were not perfect blueprints for paradise. The very integration that made them resilient also created profound vulnerabilities. A civilization built in delicate balance with its environment could be shattered when that balance was lost. The Maya, for instance, created vast urban centers supported by intricate reservoirs and canal systems. Yet evidence suggests that prolonged periods of drought, perhaps amplified by the very deforestation needed to create their plaster and sustain their population, may have overwhelmed these brilliant systems. Their deep connection to the local climate became a point of catastrophic failure when that climate shifted beyond a certain threshold. This highlights a core limitation. Even the most advanced ancient societies were ultimately at the mercy of environmental forces they could not control. Their harmony was conditional. The growth of these cities also created their own slow-moving crises. The very act of building required immense resources. Forests were cleared for timber and fuel, leading to soil erosion that could silt up the vital harbors and canals the city depended on. A thriving metropolis could, over generations, gradually consume the ecological foundation that supported it, a quiet paradox of success. This deep connection to place, while a source of strength, also bred a certain inflexibility. A city whose layout, economy, and spiritual life were all tied to a specific mountain or river found it difficult to pivot when new technologies or social models emerged. The system was so finely tuned to its original context that adaptation was a monumental challenge. Finally, the knowledge behind this integration was often sacred and secret, held by a small class of priest planners or rulers. This created a fragile chain of wisdom. If that chain was broken by conflict, illness, or social collapse, the intricate understanding of why the city was built the way it was could vanish in a single generation. The city would remain, but its soul, the living logic that made it work, could be lost forever. Acknowledging these challenges does not diminish the ancient achievements. Instead, it gives us a more complete and useful picture. We can honor their wisdom while using our modern scientific understanding to avoid their specific pitfalls. We can strive for integration without fragility and build systems of knowledge that are shared, not secret. This balanced view allows us to move forward, not with naive admiration, but with a clear-eyed appreciation for both the power and the limits of building in partnership with the Earth. Fortunately, we now possess a suite of technological tools that can help us revive these ancient principles with a level of precision and scale the original masters could hardly have dreamed of. We can begin to listen to the land again, but this time with powerful digital ears. Geographic information systems, often called GIS, allow us to map and analyze a landscape's features in astonishing detail. We can overlay layers of data, from sun exposure and soil composition to historical flood patterns and wildlife corridors, creating a living, breathing digital portrait of a place before the first design is even sketched. This gives modern planners the same deep, intuitive understanding of a site that ancient masters gained through years of patient observation. To choreograph the wind, we can use computational fluid dynamics, a technology that creates complex simulations of how air moves through and around buildings. This allows architects to design entire districts that naturally channel cooling breezes, just as the planners of old Baghdad did, but with the predictive power to optimize the effect for every street and courtyard. We are no longer limited to the view from the ground. Satellite imagery and drones provide a god's eye view, letting us monitor environmental changes in real time, track urban heat islands, and plan green corridors that reconnect fragmented ecosystems. This is like having a constantly updating map of the land's health and needs. Even our materials are getting smarter. Advanced materials science is creating new, sustainable building products that mimic the brilliant performance of local earth and stone. We can manufacture self-cooling bricks inspired by termite mounds, or develop composites that have the same perfect thermal mass as ancient adobe, but with modern durability. These technologies are not a replacement for the timeless wisdom of integration. They are its powerful enablers, a new set of tools that allow us to achieve the same profound goals with even greater foresight and efficiency. This is the true potential, a powerful synergy where the deep, place-based knowledge of the past is amplified by the analytical power of the present, guiding us toward cities that are not only smart but truly wise. This ultimate vision of rewilded cities is already taking root in projects around the globe, transforming the ancient blueprint into a living, breathing future. We are beginning to see urban landscapes designed not just to minimize harm, but to actively heal, where buildings support entire ecosystems and concrete gives way to corridors of life. In Singapore, the concept of a city in a garden has evolved into something far more profound. Towering skyscrapers are draped in lush, vertical forests, their facades alive with ferns and flowering vines that filter the air, cool the interiors, and provide sanctuary for countless species of butterflies and birds. This is not a token patch of green. It is a fundamental rethinking of architecture's purpose, creating a habitat where the human and the natural world are co-inhabitants. These green walls and roofs function as stepping stones, linking isolated parks into a continuous network that allows wildlife to move safely through the urban fabric. The hum of bees and the song of birds are no longer distant memories, but the vibrant soundtrack of a reintegrated city. Can you hear the difference between the silent heat of a concrete plaza and the gentle rustle of a living wall? This is the sound of a city coming back to life. Urban agriculture is also shedding its niche status to become a core civic function. Rooftop farms now crown distribution centers, supplying fresh produce to neighborhoods below while drastically cutting the carbon cost of transportation. Community gardens are no longer just weekend hobbies, but vital social hubs and sources of food security, echoing the self-sufficient spirit of Tenochtitlan's Chinampas. The most radical transformation, however, is happening along the water's edge. Cities are undoing the concrete straitjackets imposed on their rivers, a process that directly honors the sacred respect for water seen in Petra and Angkor. Instead of channelized drains, these waterways are being allowed to meander and flood safely into adjacent parks. These newly liberated riverbanks become spongy, absorbent landscapes that mitigate flooding, while the restored wetlands filter pollution naturally. The result is a linear park that serves as the city's new central nervous system, a place for people to gather, for children to play, and for herons to fish, all within sight of gleaming towers. This is the ultimate blurring of the boundary, a future where the city does not simply exist in nature, but functions as a complete and thriving ecosystem in its own right. It is a future that feels both breathtakingly new and deeply, reassuringly ancient. Our journey through ancient cities uncovers a powerful and timeless truth that the most resilient and beautiful urban spaces are those born from a deep and respectful dialogue with the land. We have walked the shaded, winding streets of Mesopotamian cities that grew from the logic of the river, and we have stood atop the terraced peaks of Machu Picchu, where human artistry and mountain stone become one. We have seen the sacred flow of water channeled with reverence in Petra and Angkor, and witnessed the profound public health engineered at Mohenjo-Daro. These were not separate achievements in art, science, and spirit. They were a unified vision, a brilliant fusion of deep philosophy, meticulous observation, and sophisticated engineering, all directed toward a single goal: a symbiotic relationship between the human community and the living world. This was not a primitive retreat from complexity, but one of the most advanced and demanding forms of design ever conceived. It asked planners to first listen, then to respond with both humility and genius. Today, as we confront the environmental consequences of an era built on separation and control, this ancient wisdom feels more urgent than ever. It is not a relic to be admired in a museum, but a vital wellspring of inspiration. The goal is not to copy the past, to build ziggurats or carve new cave cities, but to rediscover the underlying principles, to relearn the language of listening. We are being called to build a future where our cities are not concrete islands set against nature, but are once again living, breathing, and regenerative parts of the Earth's own landscape. If these glimpses into the wisdom of the past have resonated with you, we would be honored to have you join us for more explorations into historical mysteries. Please consider subscribing to the channel, and we are truly curious which of these ancient cities, with its unique conversation between stone and sky, water and street, inspires your imagination the most. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.